tomorrow for the second appointment, that would be amazing.
Sounds good. You mean to bring up the PowerPoint, Jim? I can't hear you. La la.
You're on mute.
Can you grab the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, we had the first one. I think, did you do that one last week or the week before, Jim? The
I
first.
did, yeah, I did presentation number 1, yeah.
Okay, so you went through all that, and that really had all the stuff, including the risk tachometer. So you got through the first meeting, and then we end up going into the second meeting, and this is assuming that you've received all the data from them to be able to do the calculations, the budget, their statements, etc. And then we're going to do multiple things. We're going to give them a lot of information on what they have in the second meeting, but we're also going to do education so that we can get them ready for the third meeting, which is then when we're going to make recommendations, assuming everything fits. Sometimes it doesn't happen until the fourth meeting. Sometimes if they're lame and they don't get the information, it might not happen until the fifth meeting, but this is assuming the best case scenario where you go through the first meeting, you got the data, or they got the data to you afterwards, you did the analysis, now they're coming in and you're going to present, a lot of the findings. And one of the things we always talk about is then kicking off the meeting with a story, get them to laugh. But really, the bottom line is just to connect with them and don't start the meeting going right into the data. It's too cold that way, and they'll be more closed-minded. You want to, find out what have they done in the last week or 2 weeks since you've seen them. If you wrote a note that they were going to go on a trip or that they were going to go see their grandkids, ask them about that. Ask them if anything cool has happened or bad has happened. And then tell them a little bit about yourself, what's happened in the last week or 2 weeks, whether it's personal or business. And it's just something you have to learn. And a lot of times if we're new to something like this system, the peak, and you're trying to learn it, you get more nervous and you go right into it rather than building the relationship. So you always want to build a relationship. Jim does this better than I do. He literally lays out what the exact agenda is going to be for the meeting. In a lot of cases, I end up leaving it more open because I don't know if they're going to ask all kinds of questions that's going to deviate me from my normal path. But I don't think it's bad ever to lay out an agenda, because then at least it gives them something. Okay, I'm going to be looking for those points. And then we're going to go through all the data. We're going to go through the fund analysis, which will be through Y charts, and we're going to focus on the risk and the fees, turnover, etc., which we'll go through. And then we're going to go through its nitrogen, but I still call it riskalyze, which focuses on risk. We're going to go through then their current allocation, their risk, their fees, and their budget. What I've done lately now is I focus usually the first part of the meeting, once I get past the pleasantries, on the budget, just to verify this is where they're at. It's going to change, we know, but we need to know that so we can then build the rest of the plan, because then the rest of the plan is always focused on that. And then we're going to discuss each of the risk by individual asset, and we're going to say, do you want this fixed, or are you okay with that amount of risk? We're going to go through, at this point, you have to explain why we're going to educate them on fixed index annuities and assets under management. And then I bring up my pie chart, the 3 buckets again, right? And I say, well, we're going to use these 3 buckets as we make recommendations into your plan, and you need to know how these 3 buckets work before we make the recommendations. So I'm going to discuss how our asset management works with you today. I'm going to discuss how the annuities work. You already know how the bank works, because when I make recommendations next week, it'll mean a lot more to you and you understand it. So you have to kind of explain that to them. And then we're going to present the fixed index annuity PowerPoint we use, and then our assets under management PowerPoint. And the PowerPoints, they're really introducing just the concepts, the strategies, and how the individual investment products will work as part of that 3 bucket system. And our focus is always going to be on the education of the budget, the risk and the fees, and then how we're going to build the income plan. Jim, comments on that one?
I think the only comment is that we're going through and educating the client on a lot of information, things that they've never seen before. It's new. So we go very slow with them, and we're looking at the clients at all times, both husband and wife, and make sure they're tracking with this, right? Because if their eyes glaze over, or if I'll ask them questions in between, did that make sense to you? Did you understand what I was saying? If they kind of hesitant, and then I know they didn't understand it. Even if they say yes, or, oh yes, I got exactly what you said, Jim. Because all this data, we want them to absorb it, and we just want to push through it at warp speed because it won't do any good. It's just us talking. The second thing Dan mentioned right on the front end is so important is that, and we talked about this before on these meetings, is that people buy people, and unless they like you and they're comfortable with you and you're professional, you can go through all this stuff, but it's not going to do you any good. So the data is so important, but that people thing is so important at the same time. That is why that kick off the meeting, we're always getting the client to tell us about what they did, where they've been. I tell them about, I had my granddaughter's birthday party last night. Today, just now, I was on the phone with a client, and I talked about the birthday party. Oh, we got grandkids too. Oh, what's your grandkids' names? And it's that personal stuff intermixed with all this other data that really, really solidifies the bonding in a relationship.
Nope, 100%. And the whole key is we push on everyone as part of peak is the planning and making sure they have a plan, making sure it reduces their worries, and all intertwine that same data and language as I'm even going through, the beginning of meeting one, in the middle of meeting one, in the end of meeting one, the beginning of meeting two. So I'll always tell them what our theme and our philosophy is, because I want them to object if for some reason anywhere along the way they stop agreeing with what our goals are. Because if they're rejecting, that means they have objections that we have to overcome before you move to the next step. Yesterday I had a client that was we did a Zoom. They moved from California to South Dakota where the wife's parents are. And he's been our client for 6 years. And we went through the review and, everything looked okay. And he goes, at the end, I just want to tell you, I think I need to make sure you realize that, when I came to you, I said, hey, I just don't want to worry about my money or think about it anymore. And he was stressed, couldn't sleep. He was a young guy. He was like 56 then, 62 now. And he goes, the entire 6 years I've been with you, I've not worried or even thought about my money in a way that causes me any anxiety. It's actually not just decreased worries, it's eliminated it. And it wasn't because of me or Jim, it was because we did a plan for that. And because he had the plan in his hand, the plan is what he's trusting. And all these steps you have to go through, like Jim's talking about, will lead you to then being able to build the plan. Number one, again, most important document, and I know we're probably the only financial firm out there saying your most important document you can provide us is the budget. The client's like, huh, what? Isn't it my statements? Or advisors are saying, no, the most important documents are the statements. They're not. The most important thing is the budget, because it's going to basically control their lifestyle. Their budget equals their lifestyle, and then the income has to be enough to meet and exceed the budget, which then allows them to live their lifestyle. So you have to start talking that language, and that's going to be the language of you being a comprehensive retirement income planner, not a comprehensive asset allocation expert, not a money manager, not a broker, but a comprehensive retirement income consultant, basically. And we go through it. And if the client doesn't give it to us, I say, well, we're going to need it for the file. I cannot move forward in your plan unless I have this data. And it's okay. Estimate, but don't estimate a tight budget. Estimate a fat, loose budget, a fluffy budget, we call it. I had clients come in yesterday, and he's a fire chief, so he makes a good salary. She was a sergeant police. She makes a good salary, and now they're going to be retiring. They're going to have a ton of income, and they just never thought about a budget because they had enough money coming in to pay for everything. So they did their budget, and it came out like they came out like $16,000 a month, which is pretty much double the average budget. And they freaked out, but they'll have enough income to be able to have that. So we had to go through that process. And it's key because, I don't know, Jim, what's the percent of people when they fill out their budget that are, okay, I thought that's what we're spending, and what's the percent do you think that are shocked?
I think 100% of them are shocked, although maybe 5% of them will say, oh, I kind of thought it was that range, but they're shocked because nobody really understands how much they're spending until they do this budget. But as Dan mentioned, this is the key component in the planning process, because we have to understand how much net after tax income we need to make that number, and how much excess cash flow above that net after tax number do we need to give them a comfortable retirement. So this budget is a key component of the planning process, and really it focuses them on immediately working together as a couple to now really understand the budget, because often one of the spouses spends more than the other, Now you have a team approach. They're really now understanding the numbers, and both of them get involved, and that's where we want them to be at that point. We want them both involved with this budget, so then we can really, really get deep into the planning process.
Well, and it basically gives us our target, it gives us our goal. We know what we have to create with their assets to make their plan work. And we talked about it before, but one of the big key benefits, I think, of the budget is so many people getting ready to retire in retirement. They literally think they have no idea how much income they're going to need for retirement. And of course, it's the simplest answer. It's okay, it's their budget plus whatever that excess or fluff is that we want on top of that. That's exactly how much income. So when someone says they have no idea, you can say, oh, I'm going to help you figure that out. We're going to get it down to a science exactly what you're going to need as far as income at retirement. Or if you market and you want to say, hey, we can create a plan that will show exactly how much income you're going to need at retirement and then how you're going to achieve it. So you just have to start looking at yourself as that type of a planner or that investigative when it comes to, okay, what are you really spending, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? This was one we use all the time. Just clients, they actually move into Georgia, so they had their current California house, everything down the line. They were really good. They were only spending $7,500 a month, and they wanted a minimum $3,000 a month of fluff, meaning how much above the $7,500. Remember, the $7,579 has to be net of taxes. So they might have needed $9,000 to net $7,500, but now we need to have $3,000 extra. So we really went $10,500. So they're probably going to need a minimum of $12,000 of gross income to be able to hit those numbers minus the taxes. And then when they move, I said, okay, what are your big changes? They said, in 2 years, we're going to move. I said, okay, we're going to move. How's it going to work? He said, well, we're going to pay off our house, and we already have the other house paid off. I said, great. So you're not going to have a mortgage, but the real estate taxes are going to be higher because they bought a very expensive house. And then we just listed out what they thought all the rest of their expenses would be. And because of getting rid of the big house payment, their expenses dropped from $7,579 to $6,227, and still wanting to keep that same $3,000 minimum extra fluff. And they want it to be as high as possible, but that's the minimum she, the wife, would feel comfortable with because she's the one that does the budget. She wanted that much extra just in case. And you got to get them to buy off on this. You got to get them to participate. Let them know. Don't freak out that this is not going to be set in stone. It's a living, breathing animal, and it'll change. And through the planning process, you both need to talk, as Jim was mentioning earlier, and work together to come up with, okay, is this the accurate depiction of what your budget's going to be? And then when we get that, I think that now puts one of the uncertainties in the certain column because we know how much money they're going to need. Then we're going to go through, this is nitrogen, or I call it risk wise, but still nitrogen. Then we're going to go through the analysis of their assets. And in the way I'll do it, and you can do it any way you want, but I always start with the broad picture first. I like using the nitrogen or the risk-wise first because it just gives us simple data points, simple report cards back on their plan. And in this particular client's case, I said, okay, how do you think you're allocated right now? And they said, oh, fairly moderately, maybe even toward conservative. So we pull it up, and the first thing we see is our allocation that's 96% stocks. So that's not going to be conservative. That's borderline speculative because almost all of it's in stocks right now. And then we looked at, okay, why is it that way? And they said, well, we don't understand that. They had a 72 risk. I think the stock market 74, 75, something like that. And we'll explain that the risk goes from 1 to 99, so yours doesn't look that bad at 72, but if the stock market is right at about 72, it means you have about the same risk as the S&P 500, which means you probably better be prepared to lose 53% if the market crashes like it did in '08. And we know you probably feel like you don't have that much risk because you have so many mutual funds and your biggest assets are the Fidelity Growth. Then you do have some Alphabet, Costco, Fidelity, Spartan funds. So you have a lot of funds, but individual stocks, and it's going to show us then what's going to happen. So we're going to say, they call it the portfolio stress test. I just call it their report card. And I say, the good news about your portfolio, it was invested for asset accumulation and growth, which we can prove it because in 2013, January to December, the stock market, which was denoted at the risk of 74, yours was 72, so almost the same. The stock market would have made 32.3%. Well, you can see your portfolio would have done about the same, 32.6. So it would have performed extremely well, which means you had a really high growth portfolio. And during this time period, all the way up until now, when you want to retire, you were trying to get the highest rate of return and you weren't really concerned with minimizing risk. So you didn't do anything wrong up to this point. If we keep it this way, you're going to see there could be some issues. So would you have been mad if you would have made 32.6% in 2013? I always ask them that. They go, no, that'd be great. I said, well, that's the current asset you have. That's what would have happened. But now we have to go to calendar year 08 and see what would have happened in that time period where the S&P dropped 36.8%. You'd have to say, yeah, we're okay losing 39.4%. And back in 08, you were 17 years younger, so you probably could say that. Right now, you can't say that. And then for the entire financial crisis, which is actually instead of 12 months, it's 16 months, October 07 to March 09, stock market fell 53.1%. You'd have to say, oh yeah, Dan, we're okay losing 56.3% at this point in our life, knowing we're retiring in less than 2 years. And can you say that, or is that considered then in your minds excessive risk? They'll say, oh, that's way too much risk. We had no idea. And you just have to pinpoint it. Then you let them know, I'm going to use this data later in our analysis when I show you how your assets are currently allocated. This just gives you a big picture of your whole portfolio. Jim, comments?
Nope. Nope. I mean, but other than that, you have to really take your time with, like Dan did here. They have to understand what they're looking at, and they have to really get comfortable with or uncomfortable with that number. And I think when they actually see that, anybody's going to be very uncomfortable if you're at retirement age or in retirement, to say to yourself, can I afford to lose half my money at this point in my life? And that's the discussion that you have to have with them, not just to present the data, but start asking questions. Because this is what would have happened if you had the same assets back in 07, 09. This is what would have happened. And this is likely what's going to happen in the future if we have something that happens similar to the market crash we had in 07, 09. Are you comfortable with this? And they're going to say, no, I'm not comfortable at all. And so you got to start that dialogue so they express how they both feel, not just how the husband feels, but how the wife feels at this point in their life if they were in a position to lose half their money.
And you can kind of take what Jim's saying and then ask questions around that. You can say, okay, with a 56.3% risk factor, if you had that and that happened, what wouldn't it allow you to do? And they'll say things. They'll say, well, I can't take much income. I might have to stop my income. It might run out. It might not last. They'll start talking about those things. So you want to bring them out. You want them to voice what that loss would cause them in financial, emotional, psychological pain. You need to get them to verbalize that back to you. Okay.
Hey, Dan, there's a couple questions. You want me to ask them now or wait till the end?
Sure, no, ask them when they come in.
Okay, great. So Tim wanted to know, do you decline to work with clients who don't have enough income to meet their current expenses, or do you work with them to agree on budget changes and things?
We've really very rarely run across that. It's minimum. I don't think I've ever had a client like that, but I'm sure I will. So I think it depends on who you're in front of, but it comes down to, okay, let's say if their budget's $8,000 now, but we can only generate $6,000 of income. That means they're not retiring right now. So we will build a successful plan, but we'll say, you're going to have to work another 5 years. We're going to show this happening. Okay. So you do the plan, but you never, ever want to be a financial advisor saying this is your plan that shows they have less income than they need to pay for the budget, because that goes against everything that we stand for as planners. So you want to then build a plan that's that, or you have the conversation, what areas of your budget can you reduce, if any? Maybe we advise, and I did have to advise a client because we were right on the line. They had like a $10,000 budget. We had like $10,200. So basically for me, that was a terrible plan. So I told them, you need to sell your house, because they had like a house that was worth $1 million. They only owed like $200,000 on it, but they were paying $3,000 a month in payments. So it would have been paid off in about 10 years anyway, but that's too late. Had them sell the house, buy a new house for the whatever net $700,000 after fees, so they don't have any mortgage, and that reduced their budget by $3,000, which gives them $3,000 more a month to spend. Okay, so you as an advisor never put yourself in a position, because can you imagine what a nightmare that client's going to be if every flipping month they have $2,000 less to spend than they need? You do not want that client. So you got to find a way to either fix it, or if you can't, then don't take it. Jim?
Same thing. I just don't take it, right? Or you got to figure out how to fix it. That's it.
And here's a key. When I was young, I always thought. So when I was young and dumb, now I'm just a little less dumber. I always thought that If you gave a client a bad news, they'd freak out, be pissed off, wouldn't become your client, wouldn't want to listen or anything. What I found is when I give them good news or bad news, it's accepted the same. Because now what it does, it gives them more certainty associated with the question they were asking. So if I've had to do this before where the client came in and they said they're 60, they want to retire right now. And they go, my friend, you work with my friend and you help them retire right now. I said, okay. I said, I'm sure their circumstances are going to be completely different than yours, but we're going to do the calculation. And again, everything. And they said, I've saved $2 million. I think that's enough. I said, well, there's no way to tell until we do first step, which is your budget. So let's find out what your budget is. The assets and all that we're going to get to, but your budget. Come up with a budget, and it's like $14,000 a month. And I'm like, okay, your budget is significantly higher than the average retiree, especially at age 60, so we got to plan for the money lasting longer now. So I go, not making promises. I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you when we can hit a net income of not $14,000 a month, but $17,000 a month, $3,000 more than you need. And I had to tell him he needs to work 5 more years, and I thought he was going to freak out. He was so happy that he finally had the answer because no one else was able to give him the answer. And he said, I could do 5 more years. He goes, if I could retire now, I'd do it, but I'm okay with my job. I like it. I make good money. And if I know in 5 years I'm going to be completely financially secure, I can do it. Jim?
No, that's perfect. No, exactly.
Okay.
I think the question there was a question there, Dina.
Yep. The next one is, do you suggest a certain fluff amount if a client doesn't provide or give to one, or how do you calculate it? Is like a percentage of the monthly budget or a dollar amount?
Usually I look at, depending on the plan I'm trying to build, a lot of times I'll ask the client, okay, is the goal to maximize your income and then leave whatever's left to the beneficiaries, whatever the amount is, not worrying about having a certain amount. Do you want to maximize your lifestyle and income right now in retirement and make sure we leave all other assets to beneficiaries? In that case, I build a maximum income plan. And then I just show them how much I can generate. Or I ask them, or is your goal really, to use a little bit less of the income and, leave more money to the beneficiaries? And I ask them that. And they'll tell you. So it's not going to always be one answer or the other. You're going to get the combination. I don't like to build plans that have less than $3,000 of net excess income. I find psychologically that starts to make the people feel a lot more loose and relaxed when they know after paying taxes, after paying all their budget items, they have at least $3,000 or more. Once it gets below that, I start worrying because I'm thinking, okay, what if then, they incur significantly higher cost over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and now we're negative. So I like $3,000 and higher. I built a plan last week. They're going to have like $8,900 more to spend than they need. And we're going to be at about, they got a lot of income, so they're going to be at about a 25% federal and state combined effective tax bracket. And they're fine with that. That means they get to keep 2/3 of it, and we have basically $9,000 more to spend, or whatever that is, almost $108,000, $110,000 extra to spend per year. So, Jim, I like the $3,000 number. What's yours?
The new software that Dan has created is now Fiduciary Genius. It allows it's really cool because it allows us to step up the budget every year by 2%, 3%, whatever that inflation is going to be. And what it does, it shows you what the excess cash flow is going to be every year for the next 30 years. So it's really nice to be able to show that client, yes, I'm getting you an extra $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month of excess cash flow this year. And that's great, but look what happens in year 17. It gets less and less because your budget's going up. So if they say, well, I don't need that much money right now, I said, well, you might want to have that much money now on an after-tax basis to save it in the bank or something conservative. So then when we get down to year 17, we got enough money built up in excess cash flow so you don't have to change your lifestyle. So the software that you guys all have access is really cool because it shows us that number for 30 years. And people don't realize, they forget their budget's going to go up. We're going to have inflation. There's no way around that. And getting that excess cash flow is really important. And also a lot of people say, well, they don't have long-term care insurance and they're too old to get it, right? It's too costly. Being able to get that excess cash flow, well, they want to pay taxes on it. I said, well, we can put it in the market. You can lose half of it at the same time. So if you pay some taxes, you can save that for long-term care. You can save it for your budget in the future. So even for those people that are afraid to spend it or afraid to take it out because they don't want to pay the taxes, if you have the software there to show them everything, it's very visual for them. They say, I get it. I do need that excess cash flow.
On the excess monthly cash flow, that you can use it for two reasons, as Jim's talking about, as far as just discussion points with them. Of course, it's extra money to spend, but the two other things I use it for is inflation. So a lot of clients will say, well, have you built inflation in? And I say, no, I haven't built inflation in. And that's why I don't want you to try to keep up with inflation, because I have no idea what inflation is going to run. Instead, I want to punch inflation in the mouth today. I want to give you so much more income than you need that you don't think you'll really ever need more than that. So if we have $5,000 of excess cash flow, your budget's $10,000. Do you really think your budget will ever hit $15,000, even under significant inflationary practices? Probably not. Also, knowing that at some point, when you get in your mid 70s, you'll start spending less and less money. So I use it to tell them I'm going to give them extra money now, because I don't want to try to keep up with inflation. I want to beat inflation now. And then, just as important, you have to look at the philosophy that every single client has, whether you understand this or not. You have to grasp this. Every single client, if you said, get it down to the bare bones, what do you want to happen with your money? Well, they saved this pile of money by the time they retired. They want to use the maximum income they can use off of that pile of money, as long as their pile of money isn't projected to go down. They want it to stay the same and even grow a little bit over time. Every single client wants that. Every single client. It doesn't matter. And if you don't believe it, you need to look at it. That's exactly what every single client wants. So you need to build plans that'll show that. So if we have excess cash flow coming in, as we're talking about now with the budget, that money now can go back into investments or the bank, and it'll show, even though we're taking a ton of income out and their portfolio might be dropping, what if their portfolio drops from $1 million to zero over 30 years, but their bank goes from 200,000 to 1.4 million? Is that okay then, as far as the legacy plan? It works awesome to be able to plan it that way. Jim?
No, let me share my screen, Dan, real fast. I want to show them something. I started to talk about the
Hold on. Okay, there you go.
Let me share real fast. So this is a plan I'm working on right now. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this is a lady. She's single. She has $2.5 million. Dina, do you have a question?
It just, is there any way to make it bigger?
It slides off.
Oh, there, that got bigger.
Go to the left and click the X by the Hi James, and then see if you can now hit the yeah. There you go. There you go.
Can you see a little bit better?
Yep.
Okay, good. So this lady has $2.5 million. She's single. Her father, who is 90, is a stock jockey, does not want her to have an annuity. I built only $750,000 into the annuity. It's not enough. And she didn't think she needed it, but the annuity is going to pay her out 7.9% in the distribution. And on the managed money, we're only taking out 3%. You can see here on the right-hand side where it says excess annual cash flow. The second to you can see, going across here, you'll see her annual gross income here. Forget about 2024 because I'm working with her right now. 2025, the second line is where we're starting. You can see what her annual gross income is, her federal tax, her combined federal and state tax, her tax bracket, net after tax income. Second to last column is her budget. And you can see how it's going up every year by 2%. I just used a 2% increase. And you can see on the right-hand side, the second, where it says 12,416 in green, that's excess cash flow, but it's not enough. Because look what happens. Even though we have excess cash flow, look what happens down here when she turns 76. We begin to go negative. And you can see this. I mean, it scares the client. But it allows us now to reposition the assets in advance. We're looking at 30 years. And what do we need to do to fix that? Well, I need you. We can't count on getting a rate of return in the market. Nobody knows what the markets are going to do. So now she's convinced, after I've done this, that she needs to increase her annuity investment to about $1.2 or $1.3 million, or I can't make her numbers work. Right? I can't do it. So relying on the technology and the software is really, really effective because she can visually see it, right? She can visually see it, and it's really, really, really impacting to the client, and it helps us. It helps us plan for the future because I know what's going to happen. It's right there.
Think about what Jim just said, and this proves why he is going to recommend an exact amount that goes into the plan, and not to sell her an annuity to achieve what her basic goals are, which is to have enough money coming in so she has all greens in the excess cash flow and doesn't have any reds. So we always tell the client, And they go, how did you come up with this allocation? Especially if it's a guy hates annuities and half or more of the money's going to annuities. How'd you come up with this? And we said, I didn't. You did. And it's all based on your budget. This allocation pretty much created itself based on what your budget is, because I know how much, if I put the money in the market, I can take out as 2.5 to 3%. I know if I put the money in the green bucket, the annuity, I know how much I'm going to get out of that. So it's a very easy calculation then to be able to decide how much goes in each bucket to, of course, mitigate the risk, but more so to create that income. So your plan designs itself. If you have a lower budget, I can modify how the allocation is. Do you want to spend $2,000 less per month? And ask them, right? But you basically let the plan in their budget design it.
There was another question Matt had asked. He has met with a couple. They have more than enough income from pension, Social Security, all that stuff. So they're still open to annuity for security reasons, but they don't really need one for income. So are you using income riders with all of your clients?
No, but we like them to be in there because you still can have a no fee type of plan that could give them income in the future. But I think part of it has to come down to really what are specifics. If the client has $15,000 in net income, their budget's $10,000. Okay, but most clients think if their budget's $10,000, they have a $10,000 of income. Oh, that's enough income. That's what most clients think, and most planners feel that. But you have to take into consideration why they're saying that. They're saying that because they are afraid, based on old school mentality, that if they use too much of their assets for income, they can use it up before they die. And the second is then they're afraid and freaked out about taxes. And the third, they're going to leave less money to the beneficiaries. Okay, we have to disprove all those things by building the plan. And my clients that came in and they said, oh, we have more than enough income. They had $3,000 more income than they needed. They weren't bad. I think they were like 180 grand of income. Taxes were probably like 18% federal and state taxes. So I said, okay, you got $3,000 extra. I go, why wouldn't you want 8,000 extra and almost have $100,000 more to spend, or start gifting to your kids and grandkids right now, rather than wait till you're dead 30 years down the road? And they said, we not even thought about that. We can do that. They go, but we're freaked out about taxes. Did the tax analysis, taxes went up from like 18% to 22% effective. Minimal. They didn't even blink. And now it gives them basically $100,000 a year that they get to now create their independence with. And that's from someone who said, oh, I think I have enough income. They didn't have enough income. Every single person wants as much income as they can get, as long as we can prove it's not going to run out, as long as we can prove that they're not going to be in a high tax bracket, and as long as we can show them using our legacy calculations that there's still going to be assets for the beneficiaries. That, Jim, would you find or not?
Yeah, and exactly. Getting back to the software, though, we can speculate, or they can speculate that they have enough income. But until you run those numbers, like I just showed you a few minutes ago, and you can actually go out 30 years, it will prove to almost every single person who thinks they have enough income, they don't have enough income, that they're going to have to get enough more income in order to handle the inflation and what that's going to do to the budget long term. So again, we go back to the software to make sure they can see this visually and said, okay, you don't really have, you have an extra $1,500 to $2,000 a month right now, but look what happens at year 11. You're not cash flowing any longer.
When you think about it, the excess cash flow is going to allow them to either spend more if they want, but let's assume, most of our clients don't just spend more willy-nilly. They're very conservative, frugal people, but they can spend it if they want to. If not, they can save it in the bank, or they can invest it back in the market, or they can buy more real estate. If not, they can start some type of gifting program right now, either to their charities or to their kids and grandkids, or they can save for large purchases, such as that next $100,000 car they're going to buy, a remodel, a second home. It gives them all the flexibility, and that's what income does. So we push and focus on income.
Bob wanted to know, so if in that example, when we were talking about the risk-wise nitrogen example, the person's number was 72. It was less than the S&P 500, but they had more of a loss. He was wondering.
Yeah. Well, that's because the S&P 500 is diversified over 500 stocks, largest 500 stocks in the United States. They didn't have that same diversification. That's why that risk-wise nitrogen report is so important, because they could say, oh, I'm at 72. That's better than the 74. Well, not really, because they still had more risk because they were less diversified than the S&P.
And Lindsay said Dan and Jim should be running the U.S. fiscal monetary policies and get us back on track.
I'll let Jim do it. Jim can do it.
All right, I don't think I see any other questions in here right now.
Okay, so then after we do our risk-alize, and a lot of times we're not going to get through the whole thing that we want to cover today because we want to cover all the details.